I have worked for the Forest Service for 3 years now. Before that, I spent my whole life in these mountains, hiking the trails, camping in the hollows, learning every ridge and creek like the back of my hand. The Daniel Boone National Forest was my backyard, my sanctuary, the place I felt most at home. I do not feel that way anymore. My name is Calvin Shaw. I am 31 years old, and I am a forest ranger in eastern Kentucky. What I am about to tell you happened 6 months ago, in early April, when the snow was just beginning to melt and the forest was waking up from winter. I have debated whether to tell this story. I signed documents that say I am not supposed to. There could be consequences if the wrong people find out I am talking. But I have decided that some things are more important than consequences. Some things need to be known, even if no one believes them. The Daniel Boone National Forest covers over 700,000 acres of rugged Appalachian terrain. Most of it sees very few visitors. There are hollows and ridges out there that have not had human footprints in decades. I always thought that was beautiful. The idea that there were still wild places, untouched places, where nature could exist without human interference. Now I understand why some of those places stay empty. Now I understand why the old-timers warned us to stay on the marked trails. Something is wrong in these woods, something that goes back a very long time. And last April, I saw proof of it with my own eyes. I was working with my partner that day, a veteran ranger named Liam Hargrove. Liam had 20 years on the job, the kind of man who had seen everything and was surprised by nothing. He taught me more in 2 years than I learned in all my training combined. How to read the weather by the way the leaves moved, how to track an animal through thick brush, how to stay calm when things went wrong. It was a Tuesday, early April. We were doing a routine patrol of the backcountry trails in Sector 7, one of the most remote parts of the forest. The weather had been strange that spring. Warm days followed by freezing nights. The snow was melting in patches, revealing ground that had been covered since December. Around 10 in the morning, we started noticing the smell. Faint at first, carried on the breeze, but growing stronger as we moved deeper into the hollow. Liam said it was probably a deer carcass, maybe a bear that had not survived the winter. Nothing unusual. Death was part of the forest. We encountered it all the time, but the smell kept getting stronger, stronger than any single animal should produce. By the time we reached the source, I was breathing through my mouth, trying not to gag. The site was in a small clearing at the bottom of the hollow, surrounded by old-growth trees that blocked most of the sunlight. The ground was soft, muddy from the melting snow. And there, in the center of the clearing, was a patch of disturbed earth about 30 feet long and 15 feet wide. At first, I thought it was a sinkhole. The region was riddled with caves and underground passages, and sinkholes were not uncommon. But as I got closer, I realized the ground had not collapsed. It had been dug up. The soil was loose, freshly turned, as if someone had excavated a massive pit and then filled it back in. The smell was coming from underneath, seeping up through the dirt, filling the clearing with that unmistakable odor of decay. Liam swore under his breath. He said we needed to call this in immediately. He said this looked like something bad. I agreed, but before we could radio dispatch, we saw movement. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a groundhog or a mole disturbing the soil from underneath. The surface of the disturbed earth was rippling slightly, shifting in small waves, as if something was pushing up from below. Then a hand broke through, a human hand, grey and mottled, fingers curled like claws. It pushed up through the loose soil and grasped at the air for a moment, then went still. Liam and I stood frozen, unable to process what we were seeing. The hand was clearly attached to a body that had been buried, a body that should not be moving. Then another hand emerged, a few feet away from the first, then another and another, all across the surface of the disturbed earth. Hands were pushing up through the soil, dozens of them, grey, decaying hands reaching toward the sky, fingers grasping, clawing, struggling to pull themselves free. Liam grabbed my arm and pulled me back. We retreated to the edge of the clearing, watching in horror as more and more hands emerged. The smell grew stronger, almost unbearable, as the soil churned and shifted. One of the bodies managed to pull itself partially out of the ground. I could see its head and shoulders now, caked with dirt. The face was bloated and discolored. Its eyes were open, milky white, staring at nothing. Its mouth was moving, opening and closing silently, as if trying to speak or scream. It was not alive. I was certain of that. Nothing that looked like that could be alive. But it was moving, straining against the weight of the earth, trying to free itself from the grave. Liam finally broke out of his paralysis. He grabbed the radio and called dispatch, his voice shaking as he reported what we were seeing. A mass grave. Unknown number of bodies that were moving. The dispatcher asked him to repeat. Liam did, slower this time, enunciating each word clearly. There was a long pause. Then the dispatcher said to hold our position. Help was on the way. We retreated further up the hollow, keeping the clearing in sight, but putting distance between ourselves and the grave. The bodies continued to struggle, continued to push up through the earth, but none of them managed to fully free themselves. Not yet. We waited at the edge of the hollow for almost 3 hours, watching the clearing, listening to the horrible sounds coming from below. Wet, muffled sounds. The sound of bodies moving through earth. The sound of mouths opening and closing without air to fill them. It took that long for backup to arrive. The terrain was too rough for vehicles, so everyone had to hike in. By the time the first responders reached us, my nerves were completely shot. The team that arrived was not what I expected. Instead of local law enforcement or additional rangers, it was a group of men and women in unmarked uniforms. No badges, no identification, just grey tactical gear and blank expressions. Their leader was a woman in her 50s with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. She introduced herself only as Director Moss and asked Liam and me to show her the site. We led her to the clearing. The hands were still visible, still moving weakly, though the activity had slowed since we first discovered the grave. Director Moss studied the scene in silence for a long moment, her face completely unreadable. Then she turned to her team and started giving orders. Establish a perimeter, set up lights, get the excavation equipment ready, bring in the containment units. I asked, what was happening. What were those things in the ground? Why were they moving? What was going on? Director Moss looked at me with something that might have been sympathy or might have been pity. She said this area was now under federal jurisdiction. She said Liam and I would need to be debriefed. She said we were not to discuss what we had seen with anyone. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. She said this was not the first time they had found one of these. I watched the excavation from the edge of the perimeter. Liam and I were not allowed to leave, but we were not allowed to get close either. We sat on a fallen log at the top of the hollow, watching the grey uniformed team work. Powerful lights were set up around the clearing, turning night into day as the sun went down. The team worked in shifts, carefully removing soil, exposing what was underneath. The grave was deeper than I had expected, at least 10 feet down, and it was full. Bodies were stacked on top of each other, dozens of them, in varying states of decay. Some looked recent, their features still recognizable. Others were little more than skeletons, held together by dried sinew and scraps of clothing. All of them were moving, not walking or crawling, but shifting, twitching, their limbs jerking spasmodically, their heads turning slowly from side to side, their mouths opening and closing in that same silent scream. Even the skeletal ones moved, bones scraping against bones, jaws clacking together. I watched as the team lifted the bodies one by one and placed them in long metal containers that looked like oversized coffins. The bodies did not resist. They just kept making those small, aimless movements, unaware of or indifferent to what was happening to them. I counted 47 bodies before I lost track. Liam was quiet beside me, his face pale in the harsh artificial light. He had been a ranger for 20 years. He had seen bear attacks and drownings and hikers who had died alone in the wilderness. But nothing had prepared him for this. Around midnight, Director Moss came to check on us. She brought coffee and sandwiches, though neither of us could eat. She sat with us for a while, watching her team work. I asked again what those things were, why they were moving, how any of this was possible. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said something had happened in these woods a long time ago. Something that left a mark on the land. Sometimes that mark surfaced. Sometimes the dead did not stay dead. She said they had found graves like this before, scattered across the Appalachian Range. Different sizes, different ages, but always the same phenomenon. Bodies that should be still, moving. Bodies that should be at rest, struggling to rise. She said no one knew why. No one knew how to stop it. All they could do was contain it when it surfaced and hope that containment was enough. The debriefing lasted for hours. Liam and I were taken to a facility I had never seen before, a nondescript building on the outskirts of a town I did not recognize. We were questioned separately, asked to describe everything we had seen in exhaustive detail. What time did we first notice the smell? What did the clearing look like when we arrived? How many hands did we see emerge? Did any of the bodies speak? Did any of them look at me directly? That last question gave me pause. I thought back to the first body that had partially emerged, the one with the milky white eyes. Had it looked at me? I could not be sure. I remembered its gaze as unfocused, empty. But there had been a moment, just before Liam pulled me away, when the head had seemed to turn in my direction. I told them I was not sure. They made me repeat that answer 3 times. When the questioning was over, we were taken to separate rooms and asked to sign documents. Non-disclosure agreements mostly. Pages and pages of legal language that essentially said we were never to speak about what we had witnessed. If we did, there would be consequences. I signed. What choice did I have? Before they released me, Director Moss came to see me one last time. She thanked me for my cooperation. She said I had handled the situation well. She said most people who encountered something like this did not handle it well at all. I asked, what would happen to the bodies? Where they were being taken? What would be done with them? She said they would be contained, secured, studied if possible, but mostly just kept somewhere they could not hurt anyone. I asked if the bodies were dangerous, if they would attack people if they got free. Director Moss did not answer directly. She just said it was important that they stay contained. Very important. Then she told me to go home, get some rest, try to forget what I had seen. I went back to work 2 weeks later. The Forest Service had given me administrative leave after the incident, which they officially classified as the discovery of a historical burial site. No mention of movement, no mention of the grey uniformed team or Director Moss or the metal containers. When I returned, everything seemed normal. The trails were the same. The campsites were the same. My co-workers treated me the same, though a few asked about my time off with knowing looks, as if they suspected there was more to the story. Liam was different. He had returned to work a week before me, but something had changed in him. He was quieter, more withdrawn. He no longer volunteered for backcountry patrols. He flinched at unexpected sounds. When I tried to talk to him about what we had seen, he shut the conversation down immediately. He said he had signed the papers. He said he was not going to talk about it. He said I should not either, if I knew what was good for me. I respected that, but I could not stop thinking about the grave, the hands pushing up through the earth, the bodies moving in ways that dead things should not move, the scope of what Director Moss had implied, that there were other graves like this, other incidents, an entire hidden infrastructure devoted to containing something that should not exist. I started paying more attention to the forest, looking for signs, disturbed earth, strange smells, places where animals refused to go. The woods I had loved since childhood now felt different, threatening, full of secrets I was not supposed to know. I found myself avoiding Sector 7. Even when my patrol routes took me near the hollow where we had found the grave, I would find excuses to go around, to take a longer path. But I could not shake the feeling that something was watching me, something waiting. The dreams started a few weeks after the incident. They were always the same. I was standing at the edge of the clearing, looking down at the disturbed earth. The hands were there, reaching up, grasping at the air. But in the dreams, they were not random. They were reaching for me specifically. I would try to run, but my legs would not move. I would try to call for help, but no sound would come out. And slowly, inexorably, the bodies would pull themselves free. One by one, they would emerge from the earth and start walking toward me. Their faces were always different, sometimes bloated and decayed, sometimes skeletal, sometimes fresh, almost lifelike. People who could have been alive just hours ago, but their eyes were always the same, milky white, empty, fixed on me with an intensity that dead eyes should not possess. The dreams always ended the same way. The bodies would surround me, close in until I could smell their decay, feel their cold presence pressing against me. Then one of them would lean close and whisper something in my ear. I could never remember what they said when I woke up, but I always woke up screaming. I started sleeping with the lights on, started drinking more than I should, started finding excuses not to be alone at night, even if it meant spending hours at bars or diners or anywhere that was not my empty apartment. I thought about seeing a therapist, but what would I say? I had signed documents. I could not talk about what I had seen. And even if I could, who would believe me? I was trapped with this knowledge, this experience, and no way to process it or share it or make it make sense. In the months that followed, I started researching on my own. I could not talk about what I had seen, but I could look for information. I was careful, used public libraries, avoided leaving a digital trail, looked for news articles and historical records that might explain what was happening in the forest. What I found disturbed me more than the grave itself. There were disappearances, lots of them, going back decades, even centuries. Hikers who went into the backcountry and never came out, hunters who vanished without a trace, entire families who settled in the remote hollows and were never heard from again. The official explanations were always the same. Got lost, fell into a sinkhole, attacked by wildlife, moved away without telling anyone. Reasonable explanations for each individual case. But when you put them all together, the numbers were staggering. More troubling were the stories that did not make the official records. Folklore, local legends, tales passed down through generations of mountain families about places in the woods that were wrong. Places where the dead did not rest. Places where the earth itself was hungry. I found references to mass graves throughout Appalachian history. Plague victims buried in unmarked pits. Mining disasters where bodies were never recovered. Civil War dead interred far from any battlefield. The mountains were full of the forgotten dead, generation after generation, layer upon layer. And some of those dead, if the stories were to be believed, did not stay buried. I found accounts going back to the 1800s of bodies that moved, graves that disturbed themselves, corpses that clawed their way to the surface years or decades after they were interred. The stories were dismissed as superstition, as mass hysteria, as the fevered imaginings of isolated rural communities. But I had seen it with my own eyes. I knew the stories were true. I wondered how many other graves were out there, hidden in the vast wilderness of the national forest. I wondered how many had been discovered and contained, like the one in Sector 7. I wondered how many had not been discovered yet. It has been 6 months since Liam and I found that grave. Summer has come and gone. The forest is preparing for another winter, the leaves turning gold and red before falling away. I am still working for the Forest Service, though I have put in for a transfer to a different district, somewhere far from the mountains, somewhere with no history of mass graves or moving bodies or secrets buried in the earth. The transfer has not come through yet. Budget issues, they say. Staffing problems. It will happen eventually, they promise. In the meantime, I continue to patrol the trails, continue to do my job, continue to pretend that everything is normal. Liam quit last month. Did not give a reason. Just turned in his badge and his uniform and walked away. I heard he moved to Florida, as far from the mountains as he could get. He has not returned any of my calls. I understand. I wish I could do the same. Last week, something happened that made me decide to tell this story. I was on a routine patrol in Sector 12, about 10 miles from the original gravesite. The weather had been dry, the trails in good condition. An easy day. Then I noticed the smell. That same sweet, rotting smell. Faint but unmistakable. Coming from somewhere off the trail, deeper in the hollow. I did not investigate. I radioed dispatch and reported a possible wildlife carcass, then got out of the area as fast as I could. When I returned to the ranger station, I found a note on my desk. Just a phone number, no name. I recognized it. It was the number Director Moss had given me after the debriefing, the one I was supposed to call if I ever encountered anything unusual. I called. She answered on the first ring. She thanked me for the report. She said a team would be dispatched to investigate. She said I had done the right thing by not approaching. Then she said something that has haunted me ever since. She said the activity was increasing, more graves surfacing, more bodies moving. Something was changing in the forest, something they did not understand. She said it might be time to consider a larger containment operation. I asked what that meant. She did not answer. She just thanked me again and hung up. I am telling you this because you need to know. The Daniel Boone National Forest is beautiful. 700,000 acres of pristine wilderness, some of the most rugged and remote terrain in the eastern United States. Thousands of people hike and camp there every year without incident. But the forest is also old, very old, and it has been absorbing the dead for a very long time. If you visit, stick to the marked trails. Do not wander into the back country without telling someone where you are going. Do not investigate strange smells or sounds. If you see disturbed earth in a place where it should not be, do not approach. Turn around and leave immediately. And if you see something moving that should not be moving, run. Do not look back. Do not try to understand. Just run. I do not know what the bodies want. I do not know why they move, or where the phenomenon comes from, or what happens to the ones that manage to pull themselves free. Director Moss never explained, and I have learned that some questions are better left unanswered. I'm still waiting for my transfer, still doing my job, still walking the trails of a forest that I no longer trust. Every day I go out there. I wonder if today will be the day I find another grave. I wonder if today will be the day I see something I cannot walk away from. The bodies in that first grave had been there for a long time. Years, maybe decades, based on the varying states of decay. They had been moving all that time, slowly working their way to the surface, slowly clawing through the earth above them. The grave was only discovered because the spring thaw exposed it, because the conditions were just right to bring it to the surface. I think about that a lot. I think about how many other graves might be out there, just below the surface, waiting for the right conditions to reveal them. I think about how long the dead have been moving in the darkness beneath my feet, undetected, patient, driven by some force no one can explain. Director Moss said the activity was increasing. She said something was changing. I do not know what that means. I do not know if it is a natural cycle, something that happens every few decades or centuries, or if it is something new, something building toward a larger event. All I know is that the dead are not resting in these mountains. They are moving, they are struggling, they are trying to rise, and one day they might succeed. I hope I am far away when that happens. I hope my transfer comes through and I can leave these woods behind forever. I hope I never have to see another hand pushing up through the earth, another face emerging from a grave, another pair of milky white eyes staring at me with that horrible, empty hunger. But hope is a fragile thing, and the forest is patient. It has been waiting a very long time. It can wait a little longer.